Story 1. I started renting a house about 5 years ago. I had always lived in apartments and was excited to finally have some space and privacy. This was ruined within the first week by my troublesome neighbor, who made my 4 years at that house miserable. He's in his late 40s or early 50s, and despite seeming like a fully functional adult, he has never lived outside of his parents' home. He spends every possible minute cleaning or admiring his truck, so he practically lives in the driveway. When he isn't bragging about some rude move that he just pulled on someone, he is hitting on the wives and daughters of anyone on the street. I moved in during the winter and started noticing footsteps in my yard in the morning. I found out that he was walking into my yard to look in my windows and see what I was watching or playing at night. I bought a simple security system and put a few cameras up, and this stopped. Then he started mowing my side yard. He would mow it the day after I did. I asked my landlord about this and was told that Mike, the creepy neighbor, considered it his property and kept arguing about the property line. It's just grass, so I let it go. If I had guests over, he would stare at them and sometimes make comments when I wasn't around to hear him. If I was in the backyard, he would have a reason to be in his backyard. If I was in the house or the front yard, he was in his driveway where he could see into my living room. If I was mowing the yard, he would get out a lawn chair and sit and watch, putting it away as soon as I was done. It came to a head when I caught him sending his dog into my front yard one morning, instead of letting it out into his fenced-in backyard like he normally would. I told him to stay on his side of the property line, and he said that he was going to break into my house and smash my cameras and computer. The police were called, and he got off with a warning. Last fall, I told my landlord that I was going to move out. During the conversation, I found out that Mike was on workers' compensation for an injury that he got at work, and that he was now bragging about how he was using his workers' compensation checks to set up his own under-the-table landscaping business. My landlord, like most of the neighborhood, doesn't really like Mike. The landlord's son and family live across the street, and Mike has hit on the wife a few times over the years and has started to try to talk to their 17-year-old daughter. I waited for a day when he had his new work truck and trailer, with his name and number on the door, and I made a video of him working in his yard and carrying 50 bags of mulch and climbing ladders. I sent videos and pictures to the fraud department of the Workers' Compensation Office. Today I just found out that he was found guilty of fraud, ordered to pay back every dollar, and may end up in jail. Hopefully, this will escalate to something bigger. As for me, I am happily living in a new place that has a lot of land between me and the neighbors. Story 2. This story happened on July 8, 2020. My dad and I decided to go shooting at a nearby range. We have a gas pistol which, in our country, you don't need a license to have. This pistol can only shoot blank or gas cartridges, but we also have a special attachment to the barrel that allows us to shoot a flare, pyrotechnics, etc. So, we went there, shot a few pyrotechnics and flares, and then, when I had just loaded a new flare, about 20 feet away from us appeared an entitled lady and her humble child. The child looked about 11, and the woman was around 40. They approached us from behind, and I heard the typical "excuse me," and I just told myself in my head, "Oh no, it's happening." The conversation followed. "Yes? Could you please let my kid shoot?" Now, we have some restrictions about guns. 1. You must be at least 15 to shoot the gun. 2. To be able to shoot the explosives from the gun, you must have paperwork, which my dad has. I'm sorry, but I can't let him shoot. He's too young for that. No, he's not. He is 17. Mom, let them go. We will rent one right there. And do you even have the paperwork to shoot explosives from it? No, but you do, right? Dad rolls his eyes at this. The woman gets angry and yells, "Just give me the gun." No, and you don't even have the paperwork. Fine, I'll take it myself. She grabs the gun from my hand and pulls the trigger. The flare went off right on my t-shirt. I put the fire out and shouted for security. When the woman realized what she did, she grabbed the flare box and bolted from the range into the forest. Her child just stood there, frozen. Then came the security guard. He asked me, "Are you okay?" "Yeah, just the shirt is a bit singed." "Where did she go?" "Into the forest." Well, this range has, to our pleasure, a kennel. There are 2 dogs trained to find guns and people. This is because people have tried to sneak out with guns or ammo. My dad is an off-duty officer, so he got the dog and the security guard, and they went to find her. Her child and I followed them. After about 15 minutes of searching, the security guard spotted her hiding in a bush. Look, she is right there. He unleashed the dog, and it ran to the bush where the woman was. Just before the bush, the woman raised her hands and shouted, "Stay away, you jerk!" And she shot the dog. The dog howled in pain as the explosive pyrotechnic exploded in its face. The security guard yelled, "Hands up!" The woman was tackled to the ground, apprehended, and later charged with assault, stealing, and injuring a police dog. In court, she was sentenced to 15 years in prison. My dad and I then returned home, grabbed an air gun, and went shooting tin cans until it was evening. And that's the end. Story 3. This happened long before Karen was taxonomically described. But this county could well be named Karen County for all the arrogance and entitlement this affluent enclave is renowned for. A lot of people here just act entitled. I taught part-time at the local community college, which means I only get paid for the time I teach. Extracurriculars are at my discretion. The semester was over, but I had to pick something up. I went to say hi to the department secretary, whom I was friends with. She said, "I know it's not your responsibility, but would you please contact this kid who's interested in taking the beginning class but wants some information? Frank's not getting back to him as usual, and I feel bad for him." Okay, sure. Have him email me, and I'll do what I can. He emailed me that he's a high school student in the program that allows him to take one college class. He's trying to decide between astronomy and my class and asked if I would call him so he could ask questions. I didn't want him to have my phone number, and I had just started a job with long hours where I wasn't getting home until around midnight. Plus, if he's this demanding now, what's he going to be like in the class? I emailed him the detailed class syllabus that lays out the entire semester with every assignment and due dates listed. I hated instructors who couldn't stick to the syllabus, so I always made sure mine were accurate. I told him to feel free to email me any further questions. He responded that he really needed to talk to me without elaborating why. I emailed him back that the syllabus is comprehensive and self-explanatory, but to email me any specific questions. I ended with, "Here's some friendly advice. It's a little rude to keep insisting on a private phone call after someone has expressed a clear preference for email." The next night, I got home exhausted and just wanted to go to bed. Of course, there was an email, but it was from his mother. It's not rude to ask for a phone call, but wise. "My son wasn't rude. You were. You lack self-respect and intelligence. I will be forwarding this to your department chair, Dr. So-and-so. You're unfit to teach, and I'll make sure you don't anymore." This is the bullet point version. It was long and poorly written. Laughable, really. I wasn't angry per se, but just annoyed enough not to let it slide. It's a character flaw I try not to indulge, but sometimes I just can't help it. I wrote, "Please stop with your petty threats. It's laughable, and you're embarrassing yourself. If my job is contingent on approval from an obnoxious parent like you, I will quit. I'm on summer vacation. I'm not getting paid for this. I didn't have to respond to your son at all, but did so as a courtesy. Under no circumstances whatsoever do I owe anyone a phone call. As for my self-respect, I have enough not to cater to a parent with an inflated sense of entitlement and self-importance. I don't care if your son takes my class or not. It makes no difference to me. I have no shortage of students wanting to take my class." Then came the gratuitous, somewhat cheap shot I couldn't resist once I thought of it. "Your son will be better off taking astronomy, where he will learn he's not the center of the universe. You should take it with him." The kid probably didn't deserve that, but oh well, his mother did. Edit. At the next semester's faculty meeting, I apologized to the chair if I caused any problems, but she irked me. He laughed and said, I could tell. Impressive." He said it was no big deal. They get angry parents all the time. He noticed the mother and son had different last names, so she was probably the stepmother who pushed him about calling and took it out on me when I told him he was rude. He read the emails and could see I was trying to help him. The secretary said, "I'm so sorry I asked you to contact him. You went out of your way, and that was your reward." I told her, "That's okay, I kinda had fun with it," which made her burst out laughing. Story 4. I've lived in a lot of awful places throughout my college years, but this was one of the big ones. I had recently moved into a house with 2 other girls. It wasn't the best house, but seemed to look okay for a college apartment. One of the girls had a friend who had lived there before, and told us that the landlord was sexist and kind of a jerk, but usually meant well, and it was decent rent. I'll be referring to him as dumb landlord. We were all broke, so we decided to sign a lease. I should have realized the warning signs when dumb landlord wanted to sign it in a big boys. After he had just eaten dinner there, and the leasing agreement looked like he chopped it up from other pictures of lease agreements on Google. We also found this apartment as an ad off of Craigslist. Things were fine for a few months. I was living alone until the next school year would start and wasn't home all the time since I would go over to my boyfriend's a lot and sleep over. It was a split house with an apartment in the basement and ours on the first floor. It wasn't long until I started to notice things happening. We'd get a good amount of rain since we were in the Midwest, by some big local lakes, and it was springtime. We'd get a good amount of water, and the concrete steps to the house would consistently fill up with water I had to jump over, and it would disappear overnight. It also started to get a little bit of a musty smell in the house, and I had started coughing and sneezing all the time but didn't know why. Soon, the other girls moved in, and we started having some difficulties with dumb landlord. He wouldn't tell us when he'd come over to check on the property. He said he did this to keep up on looks and mow the lawn. But he did it way too often for any of us to be okay with. He would argue with us about having a copy of our own lease. He'd yell at us to give him rent payments in cash, especially before going to his cabin up north with his girlfriend. But the biggest issue of all was that we were having problems with mold, and he did not care. For a while, we hadn't talked to the people in the basement apartment until everyone started having problems with dumb landlord. We'd hear them arguing and yelling down below about as often as we would upstairs. But they were in a terrible situation. Everything they owned had mold growing on it. They had bugs everywhere, earwigs, beetles, ants, you name it. They were constantly throwing away their clothes, dishes, furniture, even their college papers and homework, since it was all growing mold. They spent money on plastic bins to hold most of their important items, but even those would get moldy. We also found out that they were supposed to have another roommate down below, but she couldn't live there due to her allergies to mold after signing a lease agreement. We also found out that dumb landlord verbally abused her and her mother on the phone to the point where they were crying, and she couldn't get out of the lease. She ended up paying for 2 places every month so that she didn't have to live there because he wouldn't let her break her lease and didn't care. Upstairs wasn't as bad as the basement, but it wasn't good either. All of us were coughing more and more each month. We would wake up coughing in the middle of the night, and we were getting really sick. We tried to air out the house as best we could, but nothing helped. I ended up getting a severe case of strep throat so bad that every swallow I took made my eyes water and made me verbally make noise from the pain. I tried to ask the doctor I went to if he could prove that this was from mold later, but he unfortunately couldn't give me a solid statement on it. Me, being a vocal, neutral good person, who was also going to school to be an architect, tried to explain to dumb landlord what was going on in the house. There was no air circulation. His concrete steps and foundation walls were not sealed, so all of the water I had to jump over was most likely going into the basement walls, causing most of the mold. We also found a few areas on the roof that needed patching, since we noticed some leaks, among other things. And the basement apartment had cheap patio doors for their only means of entrance and exit, which would constantly be up against water when it rained, adding to the problem. Smart dumb landlord decided that we were all just girls complaining about silly things that didn't mean anything, so he brushed us off and said we were fine, even though I had told him that I was learning about these things in school and knew what I was talking about. He wouldn't let us out of the lease, as hard as we tried. So all of us girls in both apartments decided we would get out if it was the last thing we did. We began researching all of the legal apartment and tenant information for our state and city to get out. We were paying for attorney fees, started taking pictures of the mold upstairs and downstairs that we could find, talking with several different city staff and police, and started compiling this into a nice document. After deferring my rent payment to get a copy of the lease agreement from dumb landlord, we could finally take a look at our legal document and use that further to get out. We were also working with another landlord at a renting company in town, who I will call Good Landlord. He was, thankfully, doing his best to get us out of that situation and into his apartment. Through him, we'd get all of the legal ins and outs of the renting business, and he would help us find a loophole. Then, after months and months of arguments, money, and researching, we found it. If we sent in a mold test to a research lab, and it was over the limit of what was inhabitable, we could get out. It was safe to say we had a pretty good idea it was over the limit. The test came back a few days later, and we sent that off to the city, including our nice document of pictures, statements, and leasing agreements. Not even 4 hours went by, and we got a call from the city. Our house was so full of mold that we were to move out of the apartment within 24 hours, and it was to be condemned. We were ecstatic. All of that hard work had finally paid off, although it was horrifying to know that the mold count was so high that the mold researcher, who had been in the business for more than 30 years, had not once seen a place with a higher mold count than this house. Yes, this included black mold. Fast forward to us happily packing up in our house, all of our parents getting us out together, us moving into the apartment that good landlord kept open for us to move into, and poor old dumb landlord sobbing in our driveway as we happily stacked boxes into cars, complaining that he should have paid more attention and listened to us. This was his girlfriend's property, and she's going to dump him. We all took a picture the next day, smiling in front of the condemned signs. It's still one of my favorite pictures to this day. Serves him right for not listening to his tenants.